Hey everyone, how are you all? It's Brian and George in the same room.
Happy Halloween!
Happy Halloween! Did you know that we had a Halloween room behind us?
No.
So if I just edge away from the camera a bit, we've got the blue pumpkin up here in the background. We've got the spooky chandeliers and the reflection up here in the painting. I don't know if you can see this, so I'm just going to move out of the way slightly. But we actually do have a ghostly fireplace as well, so we're in good shape.
And we're in Edinburgh's Old Town, which is full of hauntings
and
stories of old.
Pretty much. It's a pretty cool room. Not that we planned it this way, but it's a pretty cool room.
Yeah, let's get off this subject. I'm getting scared.
Well, me too. It's quick right now. Episode 12. How did this happen?
I don't know. It happened by accident, and it's because we're not putting an awful lot of prep in. So we hope our next guest has. And can save us.
We're accelerating now. We're at episode 12, and you'll notice our cadence is getting a bit more regular again, right? Because George and I are making a physical effort to actually make this happen on a more regular basis.
Yeah.
So thank you to all of our guests that we are approaching on a regular basis to make this happen. And we're very happy to introduce episode 12. I don't know if you would like to say a few words about it to begin with, George.
I would. I've spoken to Malcolm a few times now. I think 3 or 4. But we had a quick conversation on Monday when we delved into the topic, which is all around master data management. I think we spoke for 20 minutes. We could have had an episode right there and then.
Yeah.
It sounds like a dry subject. It is not a dry subject. Okay. It's an interest. We're going to make it interesting, and we're going to get some Scottish puns in. We need to get some.
I've heard about this little side chat that's been going on about Scottish puns. So I think without further ado, it's time to introduce our guest, who is Malcolm Hawker. Welcome, Malcolm. This is where the technology works seamlessly. There we go.
There he is.
Hey.
That was seamless. I was hiding under my desk though, with all the scariness going on behind you.
It is freaky, it is freaky. Yeah. We're not used to this amount of freakiness that's going on, but it's happening. Welcome, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Nice to see you guys. Let's turn the spookiness up. Let's do it.
All right. Okay. Is that? Well, I wonder, was that an explicit thing or just an implicit? Let's go for it. I think that's what it.
Let's go for it.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's scare the people with some. I mean, you can scare people with just looking at the data in most organizations. So let's start there.
Well, speaking of scaring, I see Kate Strachny on the chat. Thanks for the support, Kate. And she did a great series this month. I don't know if you guys were seeing and catching up on her YouTube channel, or Datacated's YouTube channel, where she was posting once a day this Data is Not Scary. And where I went out on a limb and painted my face green. My topic was digital transformation. So I thought, transformation, Halloween, okay, Hulk, right? He transforms. So I painted my face green. And I think I still have chunks of green paint in my ear because this goes to show you how often I buy anything to put on my face. I didn't actually buy green paint. I bought green makeup. And apparently there's a difference. I didn't know this, but the makeup is much harder to remove, which I learned subsequently after the fact. So anyway, we're not talking about master data management. That has nothing to do with it, but just interesting.
No, well, that's okay. I've been through a similar Halloween experience last year when my face got painted in a way that I wasn't expecting. So look, I feel for you. I really do. I'm glad you managed to de-Hulk yourself though for the episode. That's key.
I did. With my wife's help and heaping doses of coconut oil, which I didn't know is like this, this kryptonite for makeup apparently. But yes, I was bathing in it basically a couple of days.
Wow. So if anyone wants a real scare, then go and find that link that Malcolm can provide us at the end of the show.
Yeah, that's one to look up after. For sure.
We've got some people joining in the stream, which is amazing. But I think, Malcolm, what would be good is to start with is just to give us a little bit of an introduction about who are you, where have you come from, what do you do when you're not the Incredible Hulk in makeup?
Well, thanks, guys. I'm Malcolm Hawker. I'm the head of data strategy with Prophecy Software. Where did I come from? Well, professionally, I've been at this a long time. I've been with Prophecy about 5 months now. Prior to that, I was an analyst at Gartner. I did that for nearly 3 years where I was focused on MDM and data governance and data strategy. That was just an amazing time. Gartner is a great company. And I was blessed in being able to talk to, I pulled a report on my last day just before Gartner yanked my network access. And I was able to see that in that 3-year span, I'd spoken to over 1,500 companies, which to me is just a remarkable number, and probably closer to 2,000 people over that 3-year span about the challenges related to data governance, data strategy, MDM, you name it. And that was just a fantastic time. I got to write a lot of interesting research. Well, some of it less interesting than others, but my name is on the last 3 MDM Magic Quadrant documents, which I think is pretty cool. I still kind of giggle when I see my name on Gartner documents, even though I was doing it for 3 years. I'm just like, I did that. So
do you get an ongoing royalty?
No, I wish I got an ongoing royalty. But one thing to their credit, they actually don't take your name off when you leave the company, which I think they could, but they don't. Your name stays out there in perpetuity, which is kind of cool. Prior to that, I had a lofty title of distinguished architect. I worked at a data provider called Dun & Bradstreet. I was at D&B for the better part of 7 years, although I did 2 separate tours with D&B. And in that role, I got to literally travel the world for Dun & Bradstreet, in essence, evangelizing the benefit of good data and the benefits of master data management as a discipline, the benefits of data quality. And in that time, I had a partner in these escapades when we were traveling the world and evangelizing good data. It is a gentleman named Scott Taylor, AKA the Data Whisperer, fairly well known out there. Just a guy that you want to have in your circle and a guy that you want to have a beer with. Trust me on that one. It's a good time. But Scott and I literally traveled the world, visiting companies, getting to hear their challenges, getting to hear what works and what doesn't work, which was an awesome time. I was a IT leader, ran the IT organization for a $2 billion publicly traded company. I was a consultant. I've got a deep background in product management. So I worked for this little internet startup called AOL, America Online, for almost 10 years, way back in the internet heyday. So I've done I've been a vendor, I've been a consultant, I've been an IT buyer. I've been in the data space now almost 20 years, and it's been fantastic. I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything. You know, people ask me, well, why do you do what you do? And it's because I love solving fairly complex problems. And MDM can get complex. It doesn't have to be. We can talk about that some more. But it's just a space that I love being in.
Well, that's an awesome introduction to start with, and I think when we were initially chatting about this, Malcolm, we'd come across a couple of different titles that you'd had, and we wondered what a good title for the show, and we'd recycled this a little bit as well. And I think one of the ones that we talked about was like the underbelly of an analyst and what that really means, and someone like for us, it's pretty like, well, we're not worthy to have like an ex-Gartner analyst on the show that can tell us all about things about the Magic Quadrant that don't just say, you know, this is the Magic Quadrant, please download here and pay us an exorbitant fee for it. So I don't know, what is your, how do you feel about that time in your career looking back on Gartner? Because I think for most people in the data industry, right, George, they look up to it, and when they see that report, they look at it as gospel. So what can you tell us about that whole process that you went through with Gartner and what goes into making one of those Magic Quadrants?
It was great. Gartner is a great company, and it hires great people. I don't want to say that about myself because that sounds egocentric, but having worked there and worked with a number of the smartest people I will ever probably meet. And so their views are and their perspectives are fantastic, and I was honored to work with all those people. You know, on the positive side, Gartner provides a lot of value. It's just, you know, I did talk to 1,500 companies, and for a mid-sized company that isn't a Fortune 1000 or isn't a Fortune even 500 or whatever, the idea that you could talk to somebody who has talked to 1,500 of your peers to understand what's working and what's not working, I mean, that's unbelievably valuable. The cost for somebody to put together competitive intelligence, for example, right? Vendors would call all the time and ask, what's happening in the space? What's going on? What are you hearing? The cost to build out a competitive intelligence organization for a software vendor would be astronomical by comparison to what it would cost to talk to a Gartner analyst who's doing that all day, every day. So there's most certainly a lot of value there for the clients. I've been on LinkedIn, pretty active for the last few months, and I've heard a lot of concerns of people talking about bias within Gartner. Well, Gartner analysts are biased, and well, we're all human, right? So we're all biased. But I can tell you from having worked there that they work really, really hard at trying to eliminate that, right? And they try to make facts drive everything from the perspective of their research, especially the Magic Quadrant. So there is a very rigorous editorial process. There's a very rigorous peer review process. There's a very rigorous process when it comes to providing and building fact bases to come to conclusions about vendors and their capabilities and where they should be on Magic Quadrant. So there's a lot of structure there. They are very, very data driven, and they're very, very client driven. So that's the good news about Gartner. Incredibly valuable. I do certainly recommend them. There's a ton of value there. Now, I do see some interesting effects right now that I'm on the outside looking back in. And I think that Gartner has a lot of power to drive the market. And I think it's not consciously done. I don't think that there are analysts out there saying, I'm going to point the market over here, or I'm going to point them at this thing or this trend or this phenomenon. I'll give you an example, a very specific example. So earlier, a couple of months ago, Gartner published what they call their hype cycle, right? And I'm sure you've seen this. It's this kind of parabolic graph where it talks about technologies that are on their way up, technologies are on their way down, and technologies as they go to this thing called the plateau of productivity, which means basically maturity. You've arrived. It's not hyped anymore. You're just kind of part of the daily operating procedure with most organizations. Gartner published their data and analytics hype cycle, and they put the data mesh on the way up, but they labeled it as what Gartner calls obsolete before plateau. Now, people saw that. They just read the obsolete part, and they're like, what do you mean? And of course, data mesh, data fabric, there are these growing tribes on LinkedIn, and all of a sudden there was this big flutter about, well, Gartner says that the data mesh is obsolete. And a lot of people would disagree with that. Separate conversation, whether you agree or you disagree, but that's one example where I think there was a lot of very, very good intention there, because sitting under that assertion is a lot of research and a lot of insight that I think, and I'm paraphrasing now, I don't want to put words in Gartner's mouth because I wasn't the one that put the data mesh in that position. But I think what they're saying is there's still value here. It's still an interesting technology. It's still hyped. It's still on the way up. But in 3 to 4 to 5 years, it's probably going to be subsumed by something else, right? Whether that's a data fabric, whether that is some sort of more advanced semantic layer, some sort of hyper advanced, knowledge graph that solves for some of these issues, whatever that is, that it's going to never hit maturity because it will evolve to be something else. So that's what I think they meant to say, because my name is on probably about a dozen hype cycles, and I know the rigor that goes into some of some of these assertions. But that's one example where Gartner can actually drive the market in a certain direction, whether it's conscious, whether it's not conscious. If you're a senior IT leader and you read that and you're like, oh man, well, maybe I shouldn't look at the data mesh, right? Maybe I shouldn't be considering this, which I think is intentional on Gartner's behalf. It's just their influence can be kind of outsized to a certain degree. So that's something I think that they need to watch for. They've always known that, but individual analysts do carry a lot of sway, right? Individual analysts can start talking about things and saying, well, me as an analyst, I think this is important. And then they'll say it again, and then they'll say it again, and then they'll say it again. And the people they said it to start saying it to people. So this network effect starts to evolve. And then lo and behold, those people start to call the analyst and say, hey, I heard about X. Can you tell me about X? And then it's this kind of this self-feeding process where all of a sudden topic X becomes huge. And then you kind of step back and you're like, well, wait a minute. Did topic X become huge because the clients need it? Or did topic X become huge because the analyst was talking about it a lot? So
and there's the look back to bias, right, that you talked about right at the beginning. You try your best to be completely unbiased, but do you implicitly become biased, or how hard do you have to work to not become biased when you're in that feedback loop the whole time?
Yeah. I mean, I see that every day in LinkedIn. right? Like, so in my role at Prophecy, it's my mission to help people in the data space advance their data and analytics maturity, understand how to be successful at MDM, understand how to execute a data strategy. That's my job. And I'm out there on LinkedIn trying to share as much information as I can. But what I see is my boss asked me the other day, he's like, how's it going? Are you reaching the right audience? And he specifically asked the question, are you seeing anything differently on LinkedIn than what you saw at Gartner? I thought for a minute, I was like, that's a great question, because my first answer was, no, I'm not. I'm seeing largely the same things. I'm seeing people struggle with governance, and they're struggling with executing on data strategy. They're struggling on building business cases, all these things. Then I thought about it a little bit. It's like, well, wait a minute. Maybe I'm only seeing that because that's what the algorithm on LinkedIn is feeding me, right? And that's the feedback loop that you were just talking about, which was, okay, so am I kind of like creating my own bias pool here? Because that's kind of what I'm talking about. And then that's what's coming back to me on LinkedIn. And if true, how do I break that? Right? Rhetorical question, but point taken. Absolutely.
Therein lies the big issue with practically every social media platform, is this sort of feedback echo chamber type issue that is the source of so many conversations.
Right.
Yeah. The more that you like and love and comment on something, the more, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a LinkedIn echo chamber conversation, but the more that you interact with both types of comments, the more you'll get it in your feed. And I'm sure there's many more people qualified on this broadcast watching in the background to talk about that side of things. But it is interesting in how bias plays a role or not in everything that we do. And how have you found that percolation then, Malcolm, when you've moved from somewhere like Gartner, who their job is to be unbiased, into a slightly more targeted area of the universe? How do you find that transition when you have to do that?
Well, it's been a good transition, largely because many of the controls that were on me at Gartner, for very, very good reason. I'm not complaining, but a lot of the controls that I was subject to at Gartner, I'm no longer subject to. It's actually one of the reasons why I left, right? Because oddly, I believe that I could expand my message if I left Gartner. So I could have additional distribution channels. I could have different ways of reaching people. I could go beyond just the kind of the standard branded Gartner content and Gartner conferences and get into blogs and YouTube videos and live events like this, right? You don't see Gartner analysts doing a lot of this stuff because of ironically, because they're trying to avoid any perception of bias, right? Like, so you won't see Gartner analysts very active on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I avoided it, specifically avoided it because I didn't want to create the impression of any sort of bias. There was even training at Gartner was like, hey, don't like anything on like, meaning, click like, don't like anything on LinkedIn because that could give the impression that you are supporting something, right? Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of controls at Gartner that were there for very, very good reason that I'm no longer subject to. But that doesn't mean that I don't have to be careful. I certainly, obviously, still need to be careful because I'm trying to maintain a personal brand and build that brand, and I want to be associated with positive things and good things, and I don't want to be out there, in mudslinging on LinkedIn and name calling or other things. And amazingly, I still actually see that. Right, like you'd think that LinkedIn. I know we don't want to make it about LinkedIn, but to make a long story short, it's been a great transition. I'm loving the freedom that I'm having outside of Gartner. Perhaps the oddest thing that I've experienced in that transition was that when I left, I thought it's like, oh well, hey, people are going to be knocking down my door to have me speak at their conferences. Right, because if you're a purveyor of information about best practices or whatever it is, you'd want to have a Gartner analyst talking there because that's a lot of credibility, right? But as it turns out, working for a software company has put a lot of limits on that because the minute that people see that I work for a software company, they're like, oh well, that's you need to sponsor. And I get that, right? If you're running a for-profit business out there and you're running a conference and you're trying to make money and you need sponsorship to pay for the free lunches and to pay for everything else that you're doing and the expensive meeting rooms, I get that. But at the same time, it's closed the doors on a lot of speaking opportunities. So I found that interesting and completely unanticipated.
Well, look, a couple of points to make there. First of all, we highly value having an ex-Gartner analyst in the room virtually with us. We have done a couple of these in the room, but yeah, I mean, it's an extremely valuable thing for us. And the other thing I wanted to tag on as well, and I think we'll get into the area of MDM and what that's all about soon, but you mentioned right at the start, I have to mention Scott Taylor, right? Because Scott hooked us up together and brought us into the brilliant Stranger Things zone that is Malcolm Hawker. I don't know why, I just had Hawkins in my head. I don't know why that came out like that, but there you go, Malcolm Hawkins. So like you and Scott are pretty much synonymous in the MDM space, right? So how was your relationship with Scott manifested then? How did that all happen? Did you meet him? He met you? Was he your boss? He his? Or did you just slap each other in the face on the street one day and discovered that you both liked MDM?
Well, we hired him at D&B at Dun & Bradstreet. I was already working there, and we hired him into, I want to say, gosh, a product marketing role, right? A communication type role. Scott, most certainly, without a doubt, is the best data storyteller I have ever met and probably will ever meet. Scott has an uncanny ability to make technical things and complex things and difficult things seem doable and seem achievable, yet without being overly pithy. Yes, he uses interesting ways to do it. He can use hand puppets and he can use children's stories. I applaud that, by the way, because I think that we can take ourselves way too seriously. And any way that you can deliver a message that is easily digestible by an audience, I'm all for it. So at Dun & Bradstreet, he was brought into a role to largely play an evangelist type role, which he's incredibly good at. And our employer at the time figured out, oh, okay, well, we need to take the message to people because people are avoiding MDM. They're not talking about data quality. So, we're going to have to take the message to them. So we kind of embarked on this city tour type model, right? Large software companies do this. They kind of go on city tours and they'll go city to city to city. Well, we did that. And Scott was the why and I was the how. So I've managed engineering teams in my past. I'm not an engineer, but I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough about APIs, about data models, about data integration to be slightly dangerous and slightly informed. But when we went on these tours, Scott would be kind of the he would set them up, right? He would provide the why, and then we would transition into the how, and I would kind of start to talk about, okay, well, how would you actually implement a third-party data source into your master data management ecosystem or into your data quality ecosystem? What does that mean from an integration perspective? What does that mean from a governance perspective? How does that impact your existing policies? So it was a great fit, the why and the how. And like personally, we just hit it off, right? Like if you see Scott and I sit down, there's inevitably going to be giggling going on. I don't know why, but it's kind of like, I guess I'm going to probably show my age here. Scott would get this metaphor, but it's kind of like, like the Johnny Carson and his sidekick, right? Like Ed McMahon, right? I'm kind of the Ed McMahon to Scott Taylor's Johnny Carson, right? He's the smart guy. He's always got the comeback. He knows how to manage a room, right? And I'm kind of like the sidekick, and I will help out. But I would arguably go a little bit farther than Ed McMahon because I'm actually adding value. I'm not just sitting there saying, yes, Scott, all the time. But I do that. But what wonderful relationship. And that's another thing, post-Gartner that I've been able to do more of as well, which is just to partner with Scott and to partner with others in the data space, right? Some of them have hey, there's Scott. Good to see you, buddy. So I've been able to partner with a lot more people than I could have ever had at Gartner. So skate, combination of Scott and Kate. Can you hear that? I've got a lot of coffee going through my veins.
Yeah,
like Scott and Kate.
It's like never been able to do that at Gartner. Skate. Yeah, but it's almost there.
Yeah.
Look, Malcolm, I think that is awesome, and I think we'll touch on that relationship building stuff as well. But speaking of building relationships, we're not building any if we don't dip into our chat, George, and just bring up some of the comments that we've had here. So The first one I want to highlight here is Ravit, who is, now I don't know if many people know this story, but I actually met Ravit on his tour of the UK when he came to Edinburgh. We met up at actually just along the road from here, George, just at Waverley train station.
Oh.
And one of the things that happened was that Ravit and I swapped t-shirts. Now, if I knew that Ravit had been watching today, I would have had my Ravit Show t-shirt on. The reason he's asking me where's my Data Mix t-shirt is because I gave it to Ravit, and we swapped t-shirts. So thank you for joining the show, Ravit. And I have to agree with another comment in here as well, which was Malcolm was the Hulk, but Kate also says you were awesome as well. So I don't know if those two are correlated, Malcolm, but it seems like it may be too. But we've got some big love in the chat here. We've got Rob, interesting conversation, charts and waving, I think. So we can draw a chart and wave at Rob. He knows exactly what that means.
Next level, getting emojis in.
That is getting emojis in, yeah. And last one from Kate. Now you can like everything, apparently, Malcolm, now that you're out of the environment that you're in, and it's safe to do so. Don't. Yeah. And last one here, we've got Scott, and just because that's what Scott is, yes, just yes, that's it. So, guys, thank you. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining the show. We love having you all here and appreciate the comments as well. So in terms of that kind of relationship building, well, again, we'll maybe come back to that, but I wanted to touch on the topic of master data management as well, George, because I know that's something that you chatted with Malcolm about ahead of the show. So
absolutely,
lead us into that.
That's what I came for.
Yeah.
I mean, in my line of business, I am seeing organizations that I think need a master data management strategy. And I'm hearing a lot of talk in the industry about master data management strategy. In fact, it seems to be the thing to do where everything else has failed. It's because, well, we didn't go right up to the start of the food chain and design a decent master data management strategy. And the idea is if you got that right, then everything else can hang off that and you can have the perfect organization. However, I think starting an MDM strategy is difficult because I've got a ton of questions around, who should start it? Where should it, where's the obvious place in a business to? But let's start right at the beginning. Malcolm, how would you describe master data management? What is it?
It's a good question. So at a very, very high level, it's the people, processes, and technology needed to manage the core, what I would call, what's important here is shared data assets of the organization, right? So what my friend Scott would say, the nouns that matter, right? Some of these nouns are customer, product, location, asset, employee, material. The list here is long, but it is limited. You're not talking about all data. So what's really, really key here is data that is widely shared. If I was in a Gartner inquiry right now, what I would be showing you is a Venn diagram with 3 rings, right? 3 rings. The middle of those 3 rings where everything overlaps, that's your master data. That is data that is used by your CRM. It's used by your ERP. It's used widely across the organization in support of use cases like customer experience or revenue recognition or whatever those processes are, but where customer data or product data or material data is used widely. And you need common definition, common quality, common structure, common hierarchy of that data. So MDM is a little bit confounding for some because it is both a noun and a verb. It's a software solution, but it is first and foremost a data management discipline. It is a way of managing data that acknowledges not all data is created equally. And some data is widely shared and needs consistent governance and needs consistent business rules. Now, we can talk all day if we want about, well, Malcolm, data centralization is inherently bad. That's kind of some of the talk I'm hearing these days around the data mesh. And well, data centralization is bad because we tried to centralize data and it failed. That means we need to completely and totally decentralize. Well, good luck with that. Because if your CEO asks you, how many customers do we have? You better be prepared to have one answer to that question. The answer cannot be, it depends. Who's asking? Is marketing asking or is finance asking? And that's the position I was in when I ran an IT organization. And I can tell you from personal experience, that's not the answer that you want to give to your CEO or your CFO. Now, this is part of kind of what I just described as part of some of the reason why some IT professionals have a little bit of PTSD around MDM, because they've tried and they've failed. There's a lot of people who are out there and saying, well, this MDM is dead because data centralization is dead and you can never get to a single version of the truth. And it's a pipe dream. Good luck, move on, data mesh, Hadoop, big data, whatever, right? With the flavor du jour. And don't get me wrong, I think there are a lot of positive things about the data mesh, and I'm a believer to a certain degree. But I'm just saying that there's every 5 to 7 years, there's some new big shiny thing that comes along that says, oh, okay, well, if we just do X, it'll solve our problems. If we just implement a Hadoop cluster, it will solve all of our problems. If we just introduce a data lake, it will solve all of our problems. It will not, because putting all of your data in one place is just going to exacerbate the problem that is natural to large organizations, which is the way that sales looks at the data is different than the way that finance looks at the data. And they're both right. They can both be right. At an operating level within the organization, it's natural to have different definitions of data. But at higher levels of the organization, it is natural and correct to have single definitions of the data. And it's finding a way to bridge those two worlds, the best of both worlds, where you have more, let's call it context-centric definitions of data at an operating level, which is natural, which is good, but also be able to make a bridge to some higher level of the organization where you can have those single answers. That, what I just described, is a more modern form of MDM and is arguably the most effective form of MDM where you can do both. Companies have failed at it in the past because they only did the top. They did the top-down, command and control, thou shalt, single version of the truth, single source of the truth, and they tried to force it on sales, and they tried to force it on finance, and force it on logistics, and force it on supply chain, and it didn't work. The organization pushed back, and rightfully, and said, well, this single version doesn't work for me, right? So more modern forms of MDM take into consideration that there can be variability in the way that people look at the data or the way that define the data, but at the same time, you still need to have that single view. So to the question about, should MDM be the tip of the spear? Well, speaking of bias, I'm an MDM guy, so I happen to think that as a part of a data and analytics strategy, MDM should be one of the first things that you're talking about. I can tell you from personal experience, if you embark on a data lake strategy, a lake house strategy, if you embark on a data science strategy, if you embark on a digital transformation with data sitting at the core of that transformation, and you don't have MDM as a discipline implemented, you're going to run into some problems. Because how do you optimize a supply chain if you don't know who your suppliers are and you don't have the ability to correctly define your suppliers or structure your suppliers or have consistent data quality rules applied to those suppliers? Because what you're going to see is you'll run that report. You'll say, okay, well, how much business are we doing with XYZ as a supplier? And you'll get different answers to the same question.
Yeah.
And then your digital transformation, I mean.
You've just said the buzzword there of digital transformation, and I've lost count of the amount of times I've seen digital transformation programs not necessarily fail, but fail to complete, right? Because you go through the 3-year digital transformation process, but you don't have the fundamentals in place. So you don't even know what the definitions are in your organization. If you try and run a digital transformation program around that, there's only going to be one result, and it ain't going to be pretty. So I totally see that. And the other one that I'd like to maybe not answer right now, but what you intimated is that there's a role for a person or people to manage those roles within an organization, right? And we had a great conversation with Kyle Winterbottom last week about the role of the CDO in an organization. And just because you were throwing some acronyms around there, I'd love to ask you about where you feel the role of the CDO fits in this whole part of master data management conversation. Yeah. It's not an easy question to answer. I mean, what do you think, George?
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I would love you to throw governance in there as well. Yeah. And for example, does governance sit under the CDO or wherever? There's a couple, and just before you go into that, there's a couple of key phrases, takeaways for us there. One, discipline.
Yes.
And the other one is the nouns that matter. So this is, am I right in thinking then within your master data management strategy or within master data, you wouldn't normally keep facts? These are your dimensions in there. So you will have your product names, but you won't have within master data the number of products you sold. That's then kept potentially in an operational system. Okay,
right.
Good. We're on the page.
Yeah, correct. I mean, so, there's a lot of IT leaders and data people out there that have kind of an antibody response to replication of data. I don't, and I think that response is a little bit overblown. MDM generally is a significant subset of data, but where that data is replicated out of source systems and sitting somewhere between the source systems and a BI platform. So to your point, George, it's you would create the keys, you would create the master IDs and manage and persist those keys in an MDM. So you'd have a single ID for product, for customer, for location, for asset, doesn't matter, which you could use then in a BI layer to do accurate reporting and accurate aggregation. So that is what's called an analytical style of MDM, and a great place to start. I don't want to ignore your previous question of, where does MDM start? Who does it? Who manages it? In a perfect world, it should be a collaboration between business and IT, where the business is defining governance policies. So Brian, this gets your question about governance, where the business is defining governance policies and where IT is managing and implementing the technologies in order to manage those policies. So the perfect kind of the marriage, you can do data governance without MDM, but you cannot do MDM without data governance. And I would dare you to try, because if you went and just bought the software, you're going to need, all MDM platforms require business rules, right? Like all software requires business rules. And those business rules, you can call them requirements if you want, that's fine. But what you're really talking about are governance policies. Meaning, how do I do an example? A data model that would be sitting and managed and persisted in an MDM. That data model is in essence an articulation of a data definition. And the joins between tables within a data model are articulations of relationships between those objects sitting there. Relationship, how you define a relationship and how you define an object, is a governance question. How do I define a customer? Is it a customer that's ever given us money, or is it within the last 6 months? Do trial customers count? Are they real customers or are they not? Are they more prospects? These are questions that you need to answer as a part of a governance, or as a part of a governance initiative and a part of an MDM initiative, that ultimately a business person should be answering.
Yeah.
Right. So the rules of the road, the policies that would be defined in a governance initiative and codified and managed in an MDM system, those things would live together. You'd have the business defining the policies, business defining the requirements, IT configuring them.
Why don't
area of overall? Sorry, go ahead.
I want to know why organizations find that so hard. I mean, Brian and I both worked on the same project, have both worked on the same project this year, and basic things like, for example, product names. The stakeholder that you're working for doesn't understand what they are, what they do, and so they'll say, well, go and speak to the business and get them to nail it down. So they understand it needs to be done, and then we spend 80% of our time trying to nail that down.
Yeah.
And then 20% of our time actually doing the coding.
I am willing to bet that the prompting for a lot of master data management strategies happens because dashboards cannot be built, and good consultants are saying we should not build that dashboard because the master data is not correct. We might not use that phraseology, but maybe we should. Maybe we should be saying that. Maybe we should be saying you've got 4 versions of that product, we cannot proceed, or we are not willing to do that grouping in a BI tool. That should be something that's further down, and not should it only be further down in terms of the physicality of where it sits, but there should be a paradigm and there should be a process behind it, and that's where master data management underpins that. Yeah. But to drive all of that, you know, that's a tough message to come from a lot of good consultants who work at the front end and hit this issue. And you know, how do we group this data? How do we put these things together? Right. We've talked to Susan Walsh in the past about how that happens in the procurement space, but ultimately it's underpinned by that framework, right? And that's the key, is the framework.
Yeah, and as a consultant, if your SOW says, you know, turn up some dashboards, give me some dashboards, right? In Burst, Tableau, Click, doesn't matter, BI, business object, doesn't matter. No. That's your SOW, and that's your contract, and you're going to have to do that. And it's going to be a difficult conversation to say, I can't give you your dashboard, or the data you're going to see in your dashboard is complete crap because there's no master data here. So there's a tightrope. I certainly get it because I was a consultant. I certainly get it. And there's a tightrope to walk here. But the right answer, Brian, is if you are serious about this investment, if you are serious about driving business transformation from having a single view of your product or having better data management around your product, or whatever the business outcome is, maybe the business outcome is related to speeding up your manufacturing process. Maybe the outcome is about reducing your material costs or getting products on the shelf faster, right? If you're serious about that, then yeah, you better be serious about MDM too, because you're going to hit a brick wall if you're not. Now, where a lot of IT leaders kind of go astray here is that they will see, aha, I do need to address governance and I do need to address MDM, and consultants will again be hired. And then all of a sudden you go from this very narrow tailored SOW to give me a product dashboard to this giant thing where you're hearing of 2-3 year program, roadmaps, and IT leaders are like, well, wait a minute, I just wanted a dashboard. So what I often counsel my consultant partners and consultant friends and clients when I was at Gartner is how do you find a way to tackle governance and to tackle MVP or to tackle MDM in as much of an MVP way as possible? Minimal viable product. Let's put on our agile hats here and be very, very narrowly tailored and narrowly focused on solving for a very, very specific problem. If you can do that, you have a much, much, much greater chances of success, because what I see, unfortunately, too much of is these giant galactic initiatives to solve for all governance, all domains, all business processes, all systems, and you're talking 2 to 3 years. I would argue that's one of the reasons why CDO tenures are so small and so short, and they are short, by the way. I think the last data I saw was around 2 to 2.5 years, which is not good. Is because they'll come in and say, we're going to implement a data strategy, we're going to implement data governance, and then the business has to wait 3 years to get any value from it.
And then you have to start the cycle again. So again, I don't go over the conversation, but so effectively what you're saying here is we'll BRB with an MDM, MVP, ASAP, right? I must get a mark for that one. I must get a mark for that one.
That's impressive.
Yes, but yeah, totally agree. How do you keep things absolutely positively small? Now, what I would tell that consultant the next time, if they did have an SOW that said, I'm going to give you a data dashboard, I'm going to give you, a data quality dashboard or something. Instead, can you craft an SOW that is a little more outcome driven, right? That is like, I'm going to give you insights on how to accelerate your product development process, or I'm going to give you a dashboard that gives you insights on how to reduce your supplier costs, right? That would be arguably a better way to sculpt it. Now it's tough because it would end up probably being more of a time and materials thing, and a lot of the clients would balk at that. But there are ways to accelerate governance. There are ways to accelerate MDM, and it all starts with picking an outcome, right? Picking a specific outcome. If there's anybody listening to this and you're thinking about MDM, if there's one thing to take away, do not think of things through the lens of domains. Using domain to limit scope is a false limitation on scope. You are basically talking about a big bang. Particularly if you're talking about customer, maybe less so if you're talking about employee and a few other areas where data is kind of naturally sequestered from the rest of the organization. But if you're talking about customer as a way to limit your scope for governance or MDM, that's a false limitation. I would recommend strongly against that. Instead, can you focus on specific outcomes? A great example is I want to improve my cross-sell and upsell, right? I want to improve my sales qualified leads by 20%, right? Those are examples of business outcomes that can be quantified. They can be measured. You'll be able to show after 7, 8, 9 months of working at this, did you do it or did you not do it? And you won't be bogged down by working on a domain that would arguably have no end. Right. But this is what I see all the time. It's like consultants get hired to go fix the customer domain. 6 to 7 months go by. They burn through all the money. Client's unhappy. Consultant didn't deliver any value. And then you got to start all over again.
Yeah. Malcolm, are there some industries where you're seeing this done well? Is anybody out there sort of shining the truth? I mean, I'm guessing if you were at Bradstreet, they're a data company. Surely they were in the vanguard. They were sort of forging ahead with this type of thing.
To the degree that a one size fits all always works, right? So there's Dun & Bradstreet, in essence, is a gigantic MDM. They take data from all over the place and they put it into one bucket and they apply some consistent business rules to it. They apply a unique identifier to it, is their DUNS number. And they append a whole bunch of attributes that describe businesses or people, and then they sell it. Are they doing it well? They do it very, very well through the perspective of one size fits all. Right. So what you will hear all of the time with D&B data, and I'm a believer, it's a fantastic, D&B data is fantastic. It's a great way to accelerate governance initiatives, particularly at companies that have lower levels of maturity around MDM and governance. If you're just trying to get off the ground with MDM and with governance and data quality, using a third-party reference source where they define the rules for you can be incredibly valuable, because I can't tell you guys how many days of my life I've lost sitting in conference rooms, literally bickering for days about how to define a customer. If you partner with the D&B, they'll say, here's how you define a customer, because it's our rules. This is how we define a DUNS number. And that can actually accelerate a governance or an MDM initiative significantly, assuming those rules work for everybody. But what you will inevitably find as you grow and mature is that those rules don't work for everybody in your organization. And I used to see this all the time. It's like, well, the D&B data is incorrect. Well, it's probably not. Well, sometimes it is. Sometimes it is, because nobody's perfect. But chances are more that it's just it doesn't work for your use case, right? Because the D&B view of the world is a very legal-centric view of the world, right? It's 51% ownership in other companies is what establishes a relationship. And maybe you need a relationship that doesn't hinge off of that 51% ownership definition. Maybe you need a relationship that is more operationally centric. So we see this all the time. If one size fits all, that's great. D&B is doing it well. But to the question about, are there others that are doing it well? Well, banking and insurance and heavily regulated organizations are doing this quite well and have been doing it well for a long time, because they can take a top-down approach here, right? If you've got a chief compliance officer that is saying, thou shalt do this, because if you don't, we go to jail. Generally the organization's going to fall into line, right? And say, oh, okay, we'll do that, right? Because we don't want to go to jail or pay billions of dollars of fines. So the financial services is certainly kind of ahead of the pack here, but they're catching up. And I would argue that financial services companies are still kind of struggling from more of a customer perspective and how to do customer MDM very, very well, because what they were doing was a little more kind of bank to bank focused and was a little more compliance focused. Did I see a lot of companies doing it incredibly well? Some doing things very well from what I would call an analytical style of MDM, where you can actually do a 360 of something, but kind of true operational MDM, where there's bidirectional flows between an MDM hub and consuming systems. There's very few companies that are doing it incredibly well.
And where do you think the whole COVID element has fed into that then? Because what we're seeing now, right, is the data market is starting to explode out of the blocks coming out of the other end of COVID, right? We all know that COVID's still real, we all accept that, but life needs to move on. So what we see in our industry certainly is that there is a huge demand for data expertise overall, and that is outstripping what's on the ground. So does that concern you at all from a master data management perspective, that companies are so, like you talked about shiny tools earlier and how everything recycles after 6 to 7 years. So I think we're in one of those bursts at the moment where technology is just emerging so quickly, and you combine that with the fact that you have executives that are literally dying to spend their data budgets now. Do you feel that process and governance and MDM and those kind of things are shunted slightly backwards because of that eagerness? Or do you see it as that the market is more well educated now in terms of what master data management can do for an organization? How do you see that right now?
The last 2 years has been very fruitful for MDM as an industry, and I'm not talking about vendor sales, although even in 2020, the MDM software market grew, and it grew again in 2021 and 2022. So it's been a very, very fruitful 2 to 3 years. I didn't think it would be that case. So when I was at Gartner in March of 2020, and everything went sideways, and the effects of COVID started to rain down upon all of us, I thought for sure that I would need to be looking for a job. I didn't think anybody would be talking about MDM because for years, MDM was the last page of the requirements document, right? It was the phase 2. MDM was always phase 2 to whatever the bright, shiny thing was in phase 1, always was. What we saw was the exact opposite. I can't tell you why exactly, but what we saw was companies finally, and I think a lot of this has to do with the CDO. And by the way, the CDO should report to the CEO. But the CDO so often reports to the CIO or maybe even the CFO. But the CDO should have an equal seat at the table as far as I'm concerned. So I think maybe the growth of the CDO role is what we can have to thank for this. But what we saw starting in April, May, June of 2020 was companies double down on MDM as a key enabler of digital transformation projects. So we saw everybody run to digital transformation. We saw companies that were saying, okay, well, we need new sales channels, right? We need to meet the customer where they are. We need to find ways to get our goods instead of distributing directly to, restaurants. Maybe we need to distribute, our food from a food distributor to retail stores and on and on. The list of use cases here and the impacts of COVID are incredibly long. But what we saw was companies saying, okay, we need to be more nimble. We need to transform our organization. We can no longer be hobbled by bad data. Let's digitally transform. And we rightfully recognize that we need to get our data house in order. That's exactly what we saw in 2020, 21, 22. And it's continued to this day because those digital transformation initiatives are not over. They're not finished. Most of them are like only halfway through, 3/4 of the way through. If you tied an ERP consolidation or an ERP migration to that, you're probably only about 1/4 of the way through.
So
the question, go ahead.
Just on that is fascinating. So again, what we saw on the top line was that a lot of budget was taken away from data and analytics, inverted commas, as a whole. Are we saying here that what really happened was that we took away the budget to build dashboards, and then we redirected some of that into deeper processes because we knew that we didn't have the budget to build those data objects at the end? Was it a consolidation period for a lot of businesses where they went on those programs, did those things? Is that a feasible consequence? What you're saying there?
What I think I saw is it was a shell game. Was that the budgets were moved around. So budgets were getting moved into things like e-commerce initiatives. I can't tell you how many manufacturing companies that I spoke to in 2020, 21, 22 that were relying on distributors or wholesalers or a very, very complex value chain where they said, we need to go direct to consumer. So let's embark on a digital commerce platform, right? Where the money got hung off a digital commerce platform or an ERP consolidation. That's another one where I saw companies like, okay, wait a minute. We've got 5 or 10, or I've spoken to one company that had over 70 ERPs, and we've been hammered through supply chain disruptions. And a big part of that is because we lack visibility on our supplier relationships. We don't really even know what's going on out there. Okay, let's consolidate our ERPs. That will give us the consolidated supplier relationships and materials management that we need, right? So the budgets, I would argue, were allocated into these mega projects like ERP consolidation, like launching e-commerce channels, digital transformation, but where there were still line items in there for, at least for MDM and to a certain degree analytics as well. I do know that, in the analytics space over the last couple of years, a lot of money's gone into data science initiatives, right? And a lot of money's gone into AI as well that hung off a data science organization. So, from a dashboard perspective, I can't really kind of speak with authority from that perspective, but I can say a lot of the data and analytics budgets that were kind of freestanding or on their own just kind of got sucked into these mega projects where it was a key deliverable of the mega project.
Yeah, and that's fair based on what you've seen, right?
Yes,
a lot of that happened.
I have, and I've also seen money getting diverted to initiatives such as data platforms, data factories, and migrating what might have been an on-premise data warehouse, an old Oracle, for example, and moving that into the cloud in a sort of idea that, okay, this is us getting ready for the future. So organizations are starting to think about data in a better way. Are they doing the right things? Some of them are, and some of them might be over-preparing. And going back to what you said earlier about trying to get your entire house in order before you do something, it's maybe not the best way to go about it.
You can miss the window, right? You can really miss the technology window, and you can the opportunity to do something really great. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Malcolm, with the comments about don't try and do everything at once, right? Because you try and implement MDM or any governance strategy that takes 2 or 3 years without physical deliverables that you can stop and say to the business, we have delivered this, do you want to continue? Or we have delivered this, do you want us to reevaluate now that we've been a year down the line? And I think this is something that we're seeing in all of our broadcasts, right? It's taking that point and actually using the camera to say, stop, and understand that is something that we need to do in all walks of data and data management.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely couldn't agree more. So you mentioned governance. Do you need a robust, complete, and total governance framework? Yes. Do you need that in order to improve your cross-sell or to reduce your supply costs or to speed up your production systems? No, you don't, right? So pick the outcome and work backwards from there.
Yeah, and I think that's another key takeaway. It's got to be outcome driven.
I think that's a big one for me, because we go into a lot of these things. We hold our hands up, Malcolm, right? We're not subject matter experts in any of the things really that we talk to our guests about, right? And this, for me, is, like George says, a prime takeaway, that the question is not what is master data management or where does that initiative fit in an organization. The question is very much around what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? What's the time scale that you're trying to achieve that outcome in? And how can we use these different elements of data governance, master data management, along with all of the other exciting things that are happening in the technology world, to make that a cohesive strategy that is actually implementable? And there's that other word again, implementable. It has to be something that delivers for the organization. We all hate being part of failed projects, transformations, deliveries, whatever they are, whether they're dashboards, whether
things
they're
that just never get
strategies.
finished.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Do not lead with technology, right? Like do not lead with technology. This is the thing that concerns me the most about a lot of the mesh and fabric and other conversations that are going on, is because there's an underlying assumption there that technology is where you start, and for a lot of people, but that's another key thing. So totally agree with you, Brian.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we're pulling up unbelievably on the hour now. This could easily be 2 hours, but I want to put you on the spot here, Malcolm, to begin with. If you were able to give us your 3 top takeaways for master data, there's 3 there, 3 takeaways from the master data management landscape at the moment, what would those be? In just a couple of minutes. Oh, really put him on the spot here. There's a sharpened takeaway.
Yeah. Well, you just did it for me. Right. So all I had to do would be actively listening. Number one, above all else, be outcome driven, be outcome driven, be outcome driven. Right. That is number one. Have a goal in mind and be able to measure it through the lens of the business. So number 2 is limit your scope. Do not try to boil the ocean. Right. Number 3, have a business case. You've got to have a business case. Do not try to embark on MDM without being able to show the business what return they're going to get on that investment, which should tie back to that outcome, right? The outcome should be, I want to increase the number of sales qualified leads. How much money will that mean for the business if you do it? Fantastic. If you do those 3 things, limit your scope, focus on outcomes, and build a business case, right? And number 4, kind of be agile and don't try to boil the ocean from a governance perspective or an MDM perspective. Start simple. If you do those things, you'll succeed.
That is some fantastic stuff right there, and really, really thought-provoking takeaways to end the episode on. Look, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining us in our echoey Halloween room for an hour. We really appreciate you being here. It's been great. The chat's been on fire, and it's been great to get everyone involved there as well. Look, we really appreciate you all coming along to the show as well. Just a little bit of a reminder, you can watch all of our past 12 episodes on the Datamix YouTube channel, which will pop into the chat after as well. And also we have our podcast streams as well. Those get post-produced usually in a couple of days after the show. But But enough about that for now. All that remains to say is really thank you very much to Malcolm again, George. Any closing comments from you?
Just what a wealth of information, some superb nuggets. We will be replaying these back in on our LinkedIn channels over the next 2 weeks, I think.
Yes.
Because I think there's some really key snippets that we had in this conversation that are of huge value. And thank you for giving away all this knowledge for free.
You are most welcome. Look forward to continuing the conversation with you and everybody else online. Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Well, thanks again, Malcolm. So that's it. Very much. That's goodbye from me and goodbye from him, as they say.
Goodbye from me too.
To your audience, and we will see you very soon for episode 13 of the Data Mix. Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks all.